right. So thank you everyone for joining us. My name is Tasha Poinsett with the Healing Advocacy Fund, and you are on the Nuts and Bolts webinar, Considerations for Natural Medicine Businesses in Colorado. Just to give you a quick sense of what we're going to cover in this webinar, and then I'll give my fellow presenters a chance to introduce themselves. We're going to start with some introductions. We're going to give you a little bit of a rules update for Colorado rules because there have been some changes recently, and some context there as well. Hopefully clarify any confusion that's still out there. Share some information about resources for business license applicants in the natural medicine program, some information around local zoning, followed by business considerations more broadly. We're going to hand it to our friends from the National Psychedelics Association to share a little bit about the services and programs that they offer for their members, and some of the things they're working on in terms of those business considerations that we'll walk through. And then we're going to close it out with a good long period of time for Q&A that you're welcome to stay for if you have the time. And again, this will all be shared out as a recording after the session. So yeah, thank you all again for being here. A quick legal disclaimer, since we're going to be talking about business and legal and financial considerations, none of this is legal advice. This is all provided for general informational purposes, and any referral or any mention of any kind of vendor or firm is not a referral or endorsement. We're just trying to provide information and education during this webinar. All right, so with that, my name is Tasha Poinsett. I am the Colorado Director for the Healing Advocacy Fund. I know we've been hosting a fair amount of these webinars of late. The Healing Advocacy Fund is a nonprofit that's working to support the psychedelic therapy models in Oregon, Colorado, and potential other states to come. I will hand it over to Josh Capel now to share a little bit about himself.
Hey everyone, thanks so much for joining us again. Thanks Tasha for your tireless advocacy, in making this program work and getting good information out to the public. I'm Joshua Capel. I'm an attorney licensed here in Colorado. I'm one of the policy, or I guess the senior policy director for the Healing Advocacy Fund. I've been working with them every day for a couple of years now, making Colorado's program work. Really appreciate the work that that they do, and I also represent a lot of different individuals and companies in the psychedelic ecosystem through my firm Vicente LLP. I guess I can pass things over to Matt or Britt.
Either or. Hi everyone, thank you so much for joining us, and thank you Tasha and the rest of the panelists for being here today. My name is Matt Grimes. I'm also an attorney, although I'm only barred in Illinois. I've been working with the National Psychedelics Association for almost 3 years now, and we're excited about our offerings and some of the things that we've been able to accomplish in those years, and we'll tell you about those here in a little bit.
Cool.
Britt.
Hey everyone, my name is Britt Rollins. I'm the co-founder of the National Psychedelics Association, a nonprofit member-based group that is looking to provide tools and services to state licensed psychedelic assisted care practitioners. So hopefully a lot of those on this call today. And yeah, very excited to walk you through what we're bringing to Colorado. Martha?
Hi, I'm Martha Hamill. I'm the Colorado Director for the National Psychedelic Association. And just here to introduce myself and support everyone on this call. I've been working with everybody here for a number of years, really excited for what we've done in Colorado and the work we continue to do.
Awesome. Well, yeah, thank you all for joining us. And we will jump on into the content. So we normally open these webinars up by providing kind of a big picture view of Colorado's regulated natural medicine program and the law more broadly. We're actually not going to go into that today, just because this was sort of targeted towards people thinking of creating businesses. So we do sort of hope that you know the basics, but in case anyone's on the call who really doesn't and just is kind of joining for informational purposes, broadly speaking, highly recommend you check out our December 12th webinar, which is posted on our YouTube channel. And again, we are going to be sharing this recording and then also the slide deck with everyone who registered for this call. And so you will get access to everything that's linked here. But that webinar really walks through the detailed kind of overview of Colorado's natural medicine program. That being said, we do want to share with you some information about some rules that have changed since we created that December 12th webinar, because a few things have been finalized since then. And I know it's been a little bit confusing for everyone because the program is live and rules have continued to change. And so essentially what's happened is there's been several changes that were made sort of near the end of December by the Department of Regulatory Agencies, which licenses facilitators. And those changes became effective on January 30th. And those changes are reflected in the final rules that you can access through the Secretary of State website or through the DORA website. And so the main changes to highlight there that went into effect are a few changes to the practicum requirements. They kind of explicitly included preparation and integration within the practicum requirements. So now it's 30 hours of in-person administration sessions, and then the last 10 hours of the practicum can be integration, preparation, or consultation, and that those pieces can be done remotely or in person. They also officially changed the definition for consultant, requiring that somebody is either a licensed facilitator if they're going to be providing that consultation piece for training licensees, so is either a licensed facilitator who's been providing natural medicine services for at least a year, or is not a licensed facilitator but can demonstrate proof of at least 200 hours of facilitated sessions with psilocybin specifically. So those are sort of the two options there. I do think from the onset of the program, many of the people who will be qualified to be consultants will be Oregon facilitators, but there may be a handful of folks in Colorado as well, of course. And then they added a clarification that preparation needs to take place at least 24 hours before the administration session. The only exception to this is for doses for doses less than 2 milligrams of psilocin, and we'll get to that when we get to the changes on the other side of the page. And then finally, they made some updates and changes to the rules around participant confidentiality requirements, which I definitely recommend you take a close look at, because that's, of course, really important changes as well. So again, those are all effective. They're included in what's posted online. Separate from that, DORA went back into rulemaking for a couple of outstanding questions in January of this year, adopted some changes so these changes are adopted. They will go into effect. They haven't become effective yet. They'll become effective on March 30th of this year. And because they're not yet effective, they're not reflected in those final rules you're seeing on the Secretary of State website just yet. And so that's why I really want to clarify, because I think people are confused about what they should consider like final rules. So the primary two sets of changes that they made, they did change the rules for administration at client homes, and also explicitly said that administration sessions can happen at licensed healthcare facilities that are not licensed as healing centers. And so I think that's a key piece relevant to all of you, that there are a few instances where these sessions could take place outside of licensed healing centers. And then they added restrictions around that. So these sessions can only occur with individuals at those locations. The individual has to be eligible, either because they're in hospice, on palliative care, homebound, or living with a disability. And then facilitators who are offering those sessions have to either have facilitated 50 hours at a licensed healing center, or they have to have a certificate in hospice or palliative care. And then they also have to be affiliated in some way with a healing center. So they can't just necessarily independently be out there facilitating at client homes or healthcare facilities. They either need to contract with or be employed by a healing center, or themselves hold an owner license for one of these businesses. And then finally, there need to be either two facilitators present or a video recording of the session. So those are the changes there. Those are all kind of called authorized locations other than a healing center. And then they did add some options for microdosing. So under those rules, when they go into effect, there can be a session length of just 1 hour for 2 milligrams of psilocin or less. And quick note, we're going to be talking about psilocin a lot in Colorado because the requirement for labeling is in total psilocin. So there's a conversion factor of psilocybin to psilocin. If you're wondering, what does that really mean? That's roughly 3 milligrams of psilocybin if you were to do the conversion the other way. So you could be thinking about, 0.3 grams-ish of dried mushrooms, although it's best not to think that way because the potency of dried mushrooms varies so much. And then there's also a change in the participant to facilitator ratio. It can be up to 8 participants to facilitator for those microdosing sessions. And then they don't apply that rule of preparation having to happen at least 24 hours before a session. So you could do your preparation session and then kind of immediately or shortly thereafter move into the administration session. And you can view all of those rules at the link there below. All right, so that's all for the rules side of things for now. Jumping into the businesses themselves. So 4 types of businesses are going to be licensed in this program. Healing centers, of which there's 2 types, micro healing centers and standard, and I'll talk a little more about that in a second. Cultivation, similarly 2 types. There's micro cultivation, standard cultivation. For both of those, really the only distinction in terms of which one you are is whether you comply with this storage limit in terms of the psilocin in the case of healing centers, dried fruiting bodies in the case of cultivation. There's the manufacturing licenses, and then one thing that can be added to a manufacturing license is an extraction endorsement, which would allow you to produce chocolate gummies, tablets, or tinctures. Without that extraction endorsement, you can produce basically capsules and tea bags would be the options, as well as, of course, whole mushrooms, and then cultivation licensees can also provide whole mushrooms directly to healing centers or facilitators. And then finally, of course, testing labs that are going to be measuring potency, checking that products are not contaminated, and checking for the presence of synthetic form of psilocybin. Absence of that synthetic form, I should say. All right, so a little bit more about the healing centers. We do get a fair number of questions that, why would somebody opt for a micro healing center license versus standard? This is kind of a refresher, but just really want to emphasize that the key distinction between these is the storage of psilocin. And so if you're really not planning on having a large capacity of clients passing through that you think you would need a higher storage limit to just be able to accommodate that, you might consider the micro healing center license because the fees are lower. You don't need quite as much infrastructure in terms of the surveillance and security requirements. There's no requirement for restricted area at your space where the psilocybin is stored. And so those can all be benefits. However, you're also going to want to think about where you're located, where's the nearest manufacturer and cultivator. Is that going to be an issue in terms of getting the amount of product that you need given that lower storage limit? And I see Josh came off mute, so I'm going to pause and give him a chance to jump in.
I just want to point out too that there is a process, if you apply as a micro healing center to sort of like upgrade your license to a full healing center. Granted, you'd have to meet, the different security requirements and have a restricted access area, but you could start as a micro healing center and then move on upward.
Thank you, Josh. And also just a quick thing to note, there is a Q&A function here. Feel free to be throwing questions into that as we go through. And then of course, during the Q&A section, we'll try to circle back and address your questions. All right, so we are not going to get too deep into the specifics of the license application itself on this webinar because we do want to focus a little bit more on sort of these bigger picture business considerations and make sure that you are thinking about specifically some of the friction between a state legal, federally illegal program and things to consider there. But I do want to point you to a few resources that the Department of Natural Medicine has, the Division of Natural Medicine at the Department of Revenue has made available for business applicants. So they have a really great resources page, which we link to here, which has information about advertising and sales, compliance tips for the ESG plan that's required with your application. So environmental social governance plan, Those are not, that's not a list of exclusive options for that plan, but it's a list of ideas that you could incorporate, just to kind of show that you have a plan for at least for one of those 3 metrics. A security checklist, and then FAQs about local jurisdiction, and local zoning as well. You can also view the application forms themselves, which I think is helpful before you like open up the application. Just take a look at what's going to be required. And then finally, they have an FAQ question, which of course they're trying to answer a lot of those frequently asked questions. And so yeah, a lot of great resources available there. In terms of the license application, I'm going to give this sort of a first run and then ask Josh to fill in like key pieces that I might be missing. One of the things I've wanted to emphasize here, because I've seen it come up as a question or issue, is that like you do want to apply for your owner license at the same time as or before you apply for the Healing Center license for your business. Every owner of a natural medicine business is going to need to obtain an owner license. But there should just at least be one associated with the business. Initially, the business license application, you're going to have an org chart and specify clearly the ownership structure of the license application and requirements for that owner license, that you would be 21 plus, and there's going to be a background check associated with that. You're also, of course, going to be asked for information about the licensed premises. And so you do need to be able to show possession of a property. This isn't, you can't just kind of apply for a business license saying, yeah, we'll start looking for properties once we have that. It has to be appropriately zoned, both in terms of the state requirement of the setback from schools and daycare, as well as any local zoning. And you're going to have to include a facility diagram. You're going to have to obtain a certificate of good standing, provide that ESG plan that I mentioned earlier, and then have a plan to employ or contract with at least one licensed facilitator or facilitator in training for your business to become operational. A lot of this, I guess I should clarify, is relevant primarily to the Healing Center side of things. I know we have a lot of healing centers on this call, so a lot of the information will focus on healing centers, but it can be more broadly applicable as well. And the applications, I believe, are the same. I'll hand it over to Josh to clarify anything that I just got wrong.
Tasha, you did great. I just want to point out, like, DOR does have a number of guides on their website that Tasha linked to earlier. Especially around like how do you make sure your property is 1,000 feet away from a school or a childcare facility, and they have like a step-by-step sort of guide of how you can do that. The big pieces I just kind of want to double click on is the state does want to know every owner or anyone who has a financial interest in the licensee, because there's a prohibition, you can't have a financial interest in more than 5 licensees. So they want to know who are the individuals that own any entity. You could have entities nestled in entities, and they still want to know like what are the final individuals, and then those individuals need to submit the owner license application. And then on the property piece, again, it's like a big local zoning question, that we've talked about before, and we'll talk about again. And then the ESG plan, one group, I'd recommend looking into is like an Indigenous reciprocity or benefit honoring sort of plan of like, how do you give back to different, Indigenous communities? Just like something to think about in this like ESG plan. The ESG plans are, it's pretty loose. You can choose whatever you want to, and also they'll be publicly available. So like facilitators and businesses can look at other businesses' ESG plans and see what they've committed to. So just something to note there.
Yeah, and one thing that you all noted on the Vicente webinar a couple of weeks ago, which is also recommended for more information about all of this, is that when you go to renew your license application, there is a component that's going to be talking about what you did towards your ESG plan. So DR is going to want to see these businesses making progress towards whatever goals they set for themselves in that regard. All right, so the Division of Natural Medicine is also hosting this application information session near the end of March. Highly recommend that you attend that. You can do so virtually or in person. And again, we are going to be sharing this out with these links so that you can directly click through and RSVP. And also through the RSVP link, you'll have the opportunity to submit questions to them as well, which is really helpful for them to inform their FAQ page on their website. All right. So we mentioned this state kind of set of zoning restrictions. The main pieces that I want to highlight are that a natural medicine business may not overlap a licensed premises with an alcohol or cannabis license. And so actually, Josh, is there any like clarification you could provide there in terms of like the licensed premises piece?
Yeah, so I think it's the licensed premises, for the most part is like, it's like a unit of a building or like a defined part of, the property that is the licensed premise. And so, if your licensed premise, if you're in a multi-unit building or a high rise in some, center core, some city, there could be, a restaurant license that's a separate unit in that same building that's not considered your licensed premise. So there's, like how you submit your application and sort of like decide what is the licensed premise and what is not the licensed premise is really crucial, both for compliance with these sort of like state overlapping restrictions, and also like your own compliance with like other requirements in the rules around bathrooms, etc.
Thank you for that clarification. And then the other piece is that these businesses can't locate within healing centers can't locate within 1,000 feet of a school or daycare unless that has been amended by a local jurisdiction, which is the case so far only in the city of Boulder, which has waived that setback for daycare and then reduced it to 500 feet for high schools and middle schools. And a natural medicine business may co-locate with another natural medicine business except for a testing lab. But in other words, the manufacturer can co-locate with a cultivator or a healing center. That's all allowed. And then the space that is a licensed premises can be used for other uses when administration sessions aren't taking place. And the rules specifically for a licensed premises of a healing center apply when the natural medicine sessions are taking place.
And I will say, if there is co-location amongst licensed businesses, amongst like licensed like natural medicine businesses, like, oh, we have a cultivation facility and a manufacturing facility, and you want to share the same premise, like you want to share a security room or you want to share bathrooms or file storage, then you have to have identical ownership amongst them. And if you don't have identical ownership amongst like those licensed businesses, then you need to have separate premises. You can still be at the same property, you just need separate premises. Now, there's not the same sort of like identical ownership requirement if you're overlapping with a healthcare facility, or if you're overlapping with a yoga studio or retreat center, or like whatever the other business might be. There are other considerations, we'll touch on that.
Thank you for that, Josh. And I was actually not aware of that, so that is great to know. All right. So drilling down a little bit on this statewide setback from schools and daycare, we get a lot of questions. How do I check on that, basically, and what do I have to submit? And thankfully, Department of Revenue has clarified that with one of the guides, and I just wanted to pull that out. So they're basically saying they'll accept a PDF of a Google map where you pin the address of your healing center, and then you put childcare in the search. So I used the example of the Colorado State Capitol here in case anyone's starting a healing center there. So as you can see, the Beehive looks like it's pretty close. That's a preschool. And so then you just set Google Maps to give you the walking directions. It's 0.4 miles. That's more than 1,000 feet from the only public access way into the Capitol. So hypothetically, somebody could do a healing center there. So that's just to give you an example, but you're going to want to repeat that for high school, middle school, junior high school, elementary school, preschool, and daycare. Also, you can't actually do a healing center at the Colorado State Capitol, just to be clear. And then in addition to that statewide zoning piece, there is also the option, though not the requirement, for local jurisdictions to put in place time, place, and manner requirements. And so time, you're thinking about primarily hours of operation. When can these businesses be operational? Place, you're thinking about the zoning component. And then manner could be a lot of different things, but some examples we've seen are like, for instance, can't, no visibility from the outside of what's happening inside, or there needs to be certain lighting, security lighting, how are these businesses operating? And so this is, of course, something really crucial to look into when you're looking at a location for your business. And I'd say the first kind of question to ask when you're looking at a location is this in a city or an unincorporated area, a county? Because the rules for the city are going to be different for the county that city is in. So you really want to make sure that you're being clear that you're looking at the right set of local regulations. And then, of course, the second question, has that city or county enacted local regulations? Most of them still have not. Of course, quite a few have, and I think we'll see that ratio start to shift pretty quickly over time as this gets up and running. If you're trying to figure out whether they have or not, I've found it helpful to just kind of start searching for natural medicine ordinance with the name of the city or county, or natural medicine zoning resolution, and start to get a sense of what's out there. You might find something pretty quickly, or you might not. If you're not finding any information, you can also try reaching out to the local planning department and just asking, like, hey, what's the status of this? Can you give me any information? If you are going to do that, we recommend taking a look at our HAF local government one-pager, which just provides a lot of kind of high-level information about the program that will help you prepare, and also think about how you can educate and talk to local staff and officials in a way that helps them understand what this is, because there's a lot of misinformation out there, and it's really helpful to clarify that this is a supervised access program, that it is, designed with preparation, supervision, and integration, that it is very different from cannabis in many ways and is not a retail model. All of those are pieces of information that can be really relevant to them as they're thinking about how they should set up those local regulations if they decide to go that route. And then a last question to ask is, like, what type of business am I looking at? Because that could also affect the way that it's zoned. So one example is, like, if you're looking at a retreat center, that's probably pretty different than if you're a therapist who wants to add this at your therapy office where nobody's going to be staying overnight. And then, of course, when you're looking into those local regulations, don't forget to consider the time and the manner pieces too. So maybe the zoning looks pretty decent, but hours of operation are just a few hours a day. That's obviously going to be a big problem. We're not seeing that a lot, but we do see some hours of operation that's like 9 to 5 on weekdays, which for a healing center could be pretty suboptimal. So another thing to look at closely. Anything else to add here, Josh, before I move on?
No, I mean, I think from like a local government perspective, most local governments have not addressed hours, understanding that it is a safety concern to sort of like restrict, like, when someone's there, like, you don't know if a natural medicine experience is going to last longer than expected. And to like force someone to leave the premise because like they run out of hours doesn't make any sense. So most local governments have like looked at this issue, have not moved forward on like the hours restriction. But as Tasha mentions, like, please double check.
All right, so just to give you a sense of what, amongst the cities and counties that have adopted local regulations, what's out there on the more restrictive end, we've got Colorado Springs, El Paso County, Parker. They are kind of using these large setbacks to reduce the amount of options for people, or taking other approaches along those lines that sort of just narrow the options. And then on the, what we're kind of describing as more reasonable end of the spectrum, you've got a lot of places. You've got Boulder, Arapahoe County, Jefferson County, Grand Junction, and kind of the main approach that we're seeing is that they're basically saying that you can do this in a medical office zoned space, which generally tends to be pretty broad. And one thing I like to clarify is that doesn't mean that this is a medical service, in that, we understand that people have different sort of structures that they're setting up, and not everybody is specifically clinically oriented, but that just is saying, like, if a medical office could locate there, so can a healing center. And this is non-exhaustive, so there's a lot that we didn't get onto this slide, but this is just to sort of give you a range of the different approaches. All right, I'm gonna hand it over to Josh to talk about some of the fun stuff.
Thank you, Tasha. And yeah, again, thanks everyone. I'm gonna jump into all of the fun, annoying legal things. And a lot of these really come from two sort of aspects. Like one is that this whole program is illegal under federal law, and so, with that sort of like creates a lot of ancillary problems. Thankfully, we've dealt with most of these problems, in our growing cannabis industry, and we've also dealt with these problems in Oregon in the psychedelic space, and and that's part of why we have Britt and Matt here to sort of like talk about some of the successes and what they've seen in Oregon, and really excited to turn things over to them here in a second. So, the big sort of 5 pieces to think about is like, how does, like how does this federal illegality affect, your real estate, whether it's leases or mortgages, how does this affect financing? And a lot of the financing is really, dependent more on, this being a very highly regulated industry, like with the Department of Revenue. 280E I'm going to touch on, but a little bit more. But there are specific tax issues with quote trafficking and controlled substance. And then I'm going to turn. I'm also going to mention some healthcare issues. And I'm going to turn things over to Matt and Brett around liability and business insurance and banking. So next slide, Tasha. So there's a lot of what we've been seeing is a lot of different types of healing center approaches. We've seen a very traditional, hey, here's a healing center. They're going to employ facilitators. A very simple business model. And in many cases, there's like a standalone. We're just going to provide natural medicine services. We've seen this model where they want to start adding on other sort of modalities of care as well. But one sort of like healing center approach. Another approach we've seen is sort of this room rental model where individuals are applying for healing centers and want to rent out rooms to different facilitators or clinical facilitators. Again, it's possible, but the overarching healing center will be responsible for the actions of the facilitators that work underneath it, whether that's from a liability perspective or a compliance perspective. So there has to be like a fair amount of trust in that room rental model. We've also seen, some people exploring the retreat center model where they want to have, licensed natural medicine services at a retreat, for maybe some weekends a year, maybe more full time, and that is possible. As Tasha mentioned, like around, you can co-locate a healing center with another type of business. You can have people under the age of 21 at a healing center if there's no natural medicine present. So if like you're not using it as a healing center, you're using it as a wedding instead. So there's like ways to have these flexible premises that like would include sort of a retreat center model. With that said, there are specific like compliance rules that you want to double check. We've there's also been different talks of hybrid models of combining these together, or there's like part of the hybrid model of like for a lot of what we're seeing is like a therapist who says, hey, I want to have a micro healing center at my current office, and that is possible, provided that like the local zoning restrictions, you're complying with the local zoning restrictions. However, there are other issues that you might want to consider around insurance and banking that might want you to have 2 separate entities, even if you're going to have an overlapping office. There is a provision that allows like microdosing, and I haven't seen, there's been talk of sort of like a microdosing healing center model. I haven't seen it, but this sort of thought there, and Denver's, been very keen on this, is for like low dose amounts that are sub-perceptual, where people can actually sort of feel the effects of them. They only have to stay at a healing center for an hour, and so in theory you could have people come every hour and sort of and work in this microdosing regime. And we have seen some successes of this model in Oregon, and Oregon actually has a lot more liberal protocol around microdosing. Other sort of approaches we've seen, we've seen, sort of facilitators coming together and saying like, hey, the cost of building out a facility or the cost of, renting the space is too much for me alone. So let's collaborate together. And, and we've seen a lot of like sort of collaboration models. There's some folks have been talking about like, hey, you could also do this under a co-op model. And the No Act Society hosted, great attorney Jason was talking about that, a couple of weeks ago. So there's a lot of different models, and sort of like the intent of how we drafted these laws was really to be flexible, to allow for, to really try and like not say like this is how it has to be, but to allow sort of individuals and their creativity and what's needed from a healing perspective to sort of dictate what this looks like. And in each of these models had different sort of pros and cons and different concerns to think about. Tasha, can you, yeah. Great. So I'm going to talk about a couple of specific issues, real estate and leasing. For a lot of folks, who have an existing property, that they might, like an existing office, they might be leasing and they want to use that existing office. You want to look at your lease. In most cases, in most traditional commercial leases, there's a clause that says like you're not going to violate any state or federal law. This is also the case in a lot of mortgage agreements. And so, if you're going to like use the space for a natural medicine business that is in violation of federal law, you want to make sure you're not automatically in violation of your lease. And so for existing properties, it generally involves going to the landlord and saying like, hey, I need to carve this out, or I need to express permission to use this property for a healing center. If you're looking at acquiring property, which is through a lease or something along those lines, then you just want to like negotiate that in advance. Like, a lot of, especially in like today's commercial real estate market, different, depending on where it is, like there is these, the tenant's like strength is really at the beginning of that relationship. And then like after, it's like you've entered into the lease and you want to change it, like the landlord's going to ask for more money. So it's like, make sure you negotiate it, right at the beginning. Bank financing, could be an issue on some of these properties. We haven't actually seen it as an issue in cannabis. In most cases, the banks just want to see their mortgage payments get paid, and they're never going to sort of like look and see like what the underlying business is. But it's something worth noting. And if you're not going to be able to get bank financing for your natural medicine business, or at least not that I'm aware of, at this time. But there are private financing options on that. So real estate and leasing in a nutshell, possible. There's definitely like a couple things you want to just be aware of. Okay, finance and governance. So this, as I mentioned, like natural medicine businesses are highly regulated, and like the state wants to see every owner and individual with the financial interest. And they have to go through the owner application, and they have to go through, a background check, and sort of like any gimmick to try and like hide an owner, likely violates these laws. So don't play games with it. One of the big pieces the state's looking for, the Department of Revenue, is you can't have an interest in more than 5 licenses. So this is, this isn't like businesses, this is licenses. So one business could own, then maybe they have 2 healing centers and a cultivation and a manufacturing. Like there's a limit on how many you can have. So make sure that if you're taking money from someone, or if you're partnering with someone, that you're like aware of this limitation. Likewise, like in the rules with DOR, there is specific benefits if you have a divestiture provision in your operating documents. And so what the hell am I talking about? So, really what this is like, let's say, your partner, and the best person in the world, but, all of a sudden they decide that they're going to start selling mushrooms illegally, and they get in trouble because of it. And now all of a sudden they don't qualify to hold a license. The state's gonna say like, hey, hey group, we're gonna deny your license unless you get him out of this business. And there's, and so the best practice in this case is to actually like have to pre-agree in your governing documents of like, hey, here's what's going to happen if Johnny sells mushrooms and gets in trouble and we have to kick him out of the business. Like, here's the terms and this is what that looks like. And if you have that provision in your documents, then the state's going to like allow you to follow that provision and is not going to threaten you with license revocation right away. So it's like a very key piece to note as you're putting together your business, like to make sure that like your governing documents sort of like reflect the nature of being in this highly regulated space. And likewise, if you're financing and you're raising money, it's like, again, you're raising money into a federally illegal business. Like, you want to make sure that, risk factors or other disclosure statements that you're using adequately describe what those risks actually are. So just things to think about from like a financing and governance perspective. Next slide there. Okay, 280E. So 280E, for those who don't know, really came about, in 1982. There's this drug dealer. I don't know if I like the phrase drug dealer, but there's an individual selling drugs in Minnesota who gets arrested and has a big operation. And while he's like in jail, the IRS comes after him and says, hey, you owe all this money. You made all this money in your giant illegal operation, and you owe us this money. And from jail, he comes and he says, well, that's fine, but I agree, IRS. I owe you this money from all my profits, but I get to deduct my cars, my home office, my employees. And he fights this case from jail and he wins. Jeffrey Edmonds is his name, for those who want to look it up. But and anyways, Congress comes back, this is 1982, and says like, absolutely not. If you're trafficking a controlled substance, you cannot take necessary and ordinary business deductions. And that's where this section 280E of the code came from. And this has been applied, ad nauseum to cannabis companies over the last 15 odd years, and is a concern as well for natural medicine businesses, because they're handling and working with a federally illegal substance. Tasha, can you go to the next slide? And so, what does this mean? First, the first thing to note is I am not a tax attorney. I am not a tax professional. I am not a CPA. And so please consult with someone who is and who's very knowledgeable on the 280E issue. I just got the phone with a good friend of mine, Nick Richards, who does a lot of these cases in the cannabis space, and very experienced. But there's a lot of good tax attorneys out there, and there's a lot of differing opinions around like, what does 280E actually mean to me? There's some that might make the case that 280E doesn't apply at all, because are you really trafficking a controlled substance? Your supervised care, it has medical value and psilocybin isn't properly scheduled. There's some like arguments that can be made there. Whether or not they're successful is a whole other story. There's also sort of arguments that there's not necessarily arguments, but there's different strategies. And some strategies say like, hey, let's have multiple entities, one entity that handles psilocybin and one entity that provides all these wraparound services. We'll put them both on the license, application with the state, and we'll try and isolate the liability, the 280E liability, into just sort of the business that handles or touches the psilocybin. And that's like one strategy. There's another strategy that says like, hey, let's just keep one business, and we'll use this section 471 around accounting principles, and we'll try and not create more, but we'll in a very reasonable manner talk about our costs of goods sold, and to bring in these services into these costs of goods sold, and and that will sort of like reduce some of this liability. And there's potentially ways to like in future years like up your basis in these companies. Again, multiple different strategies. And I'm not your tax attorney, so find that person. But a lot of these strategies, I guess, I bring up because, like, yes, it's a scary proposition. You saw that slide before. It's like you can't deduct all this, all these expenses. And also there's like some tried and tested strategies that help manage that in a manner that is workable. So I think that's something to note. And I also think it's something to note on the flip side is that, not the flip side, but like, a continuation is like, make sure when you're doing your financial forecasting, you understand the strategy you're going to use and what the implications are, because you don't want to find yourself being like, oh yeah, here's what our margins look like, and then all of a sudden when you take 280E and you're like, what am I doing here? And so like, just being realistic about like, hey, how is this going to apply? What is your strategy? What does that actually mean for your financial numbers? So you can have reliable financial forecasting is very key. And then the other piece on the 280E side is just when you choose an entity formation, and there's a lot of different like tax considerations there. But one thing to note is that like, because we don't know how 280 is going to be applied in this space yet, there hasn't been any audits that, or any guidance that I'm aware of. You want to choose a tax structure that doesn't result in personal liability. So you don't want like a flow through single entity LLC where if you're audited, they're coming after your finances personally. You want a C Corp or some entity where it's like the audit stays with the entity and doesn't flow to you personally. So 280, scary, but workable. And Tasha, you came off of mute.
Yeah. So I just wanted to say a couple things. I think first of all, if for some of you, maybe this is super familiar and you've already been thinking about 280E for years. And for others, maybe you're like, what the hell did he just talk about? And one of our goals with this webinar was to just like get this on your radar. Like, do think about 280E, do learn about it. Don't freak out about it because, it's not a new thing. And so those of you that are really familiar probably either have already been in the psilocybin kind of world, maybe in Oregon, or you've been in the cannabis world. And we know a lot of people haven't been in the cannabis world, which is why we do want to emphasize this. But like, because this state legal, federally illegal cannabis program has existed now for so many years, there has been time for accountants and lawyers to dig into the details here and come up with these different strategies that people can take to address these issues. We're not here to say there's one right and one wrong answer. We're certainly not the ones to be doing that level of vetting. But what I will say is that the different strategies probably have pros and cons. Your right strategy for you might vary depending on sort of your risk tolerance, how many unknowns you're okay with in terms of what Josh mentioned of like, there's legal arguments that could be made, but we don't exactly know what the end result is going to be for some of those. And so there's sort of more conservative, maybe safer approaches that could be a little bit more complicated potentially. Or, but at the end of the day, like, yeah, talk to somebody, talk to a CPA who knows about this. Talk to attorney. I know that this is expensive too, so we're going to continue to try to provide resources. We'll probably hopefully have a webinar at some point in the future where we get some of these people on to like dig in a little bit more on this. So stay tuned for that. But for now, just wanted to give kind of the high level, put it out there, get it on your radar. All right, healthcare related. And I do want to make sure, Josh, that we have time for the NPA folks. So let's make
yeah, we have till 1:30 or 1, Tasha.
1:30, but
okay.
I know. Yeah.
I'll hurry. So yeah, I mean, the healthcare related pieces, just a couple of things to note. For one of the biggest benefits of Colorado's program, not biggest benefits, but like the biggest difference between Colorado and Oregon is that we sort of took this approach of the clinical facilitator in addition to the facilitator that allows the intermingling of natural medicine services into traditional healthcare. And there's things to note about that, and so one, and we'll hear more from Matt and Britta on this, is insurance. It's like if you're a licensed professional counselor, your insurance probably doesn't cover you to be a clinical facilitator. So or if you're a physician and now all of a sudden you're engaged in a non-sanctioned modality of care, your insurance probably doesn't cover you. So like, pay attention to that. We'll hear more from MPA about that. Third-party payer contracts is something to note for those that take insurance. If you take insurance from United and all of a sudden you're working with a United patient, you want to send them to a non-United approved modality of care that is illegal, you want to make sure that like that's okay under that third-party payer contract. So doing a little bit of due diligence there. And then the third piece that a lot of people talk about is like DEA prescriber registrations. This one's really interesting. Yes, like the DEA can revoke a DEA registration for, in the public interest. When we've seen the DEA try and do this around medical cannabis, around death with dignity, euthanasia. The DA sent out a threat that they were going to do this, and then in each case has lost. And the courts have said that it's not in the public interest for them to sort of like restrict, a physician's free speech, or or this sort of like method or this like practice that's authorized by the state. So it's a risk, but it's, there's a lot of steps, I think, before it becomes a real risk. But anyways, some specific healthcare related issues. And with that, I'll turn things over, I believe, to Matt and Britt there. To talk about banking, which is, an exciting one.
Hey everyone, Britt Rollins here with the NPA. One of the things that we've been working on since our inception a few years ago, and since we started working with a number of organizations in Oregon, we knew right out of the gate that banking was going to be a problem. That's because large banks are, they are national, if not international in scope, and they do need to stick to all of the federal laws as outlined. And so banks have a different risk tolerance. Regardless of what Colorado sets up or others, banks get to decide the risk that they'll take on. So just because a jurisdiction or a state decides we're going to have this program, the banks don't necessarily have to participate if they don't want to. And a lot of them are finding that that risk is just too much, right? And so, that's one thing to consider, that even though, there are very few, and we'll talk about a few of the options that are out there, although there are very few, it's well worth noting that using a bank without letting them know that what your business is could lead to a disruption of business services, meaning they could cancel your account, freeze your, the assets that you have within them, and you'd have to look at some lengthy conversations to get that unfrozen. But all this is to say is it's not to scare you, but just know that there are very few players operating in the banking space right now, and that will have impact on, your ability to conduct this. But we'll walk through a few options here in a minute. There are banks that, although, you're not going to go to Chase, you're not going to go to Wells Fargo. Those guys are not currently looking to support this type of work. We do currently have 3 banking partners, and you can reach out to banking@yournpa.org, yournpa.org. That's banking@yournpa.org. For more information about these. We have specific relationships with 3 different banking partners. A third one is coming online hopefully shortly. And these are people that we'll have to put you in contact with, because the banks aren't looking to elevate their risks. They're not really out there looking to be publicly identified as banking this, but there are banks that are willing to work with you, and we're happy to talk to you about that and where those stand. One thing to note here is that a lot of the banks that we would have to recommend you to, back to the options that Josh was talking about previously, one of the ways that they are able to mitigate their own risk is to enforce that the businesses that they're going to bank with actually do have 2 EINs. One EIN would be relegated to the Schedule I substance, and that cannot be banked. Everything else, the services, the room fees, all of those things are actually, if they are kept within the other EIN, seen as non-riskier customer assets and can be banked with these folks. So again, to the earlier point, how you're able to work with a bank is going to be dependent on your business structure and how you've gone about putting that together. Next slide.
I just wanted to jump in and say a quick note that sort of ties back to the Colorado rules. So you may recall that, you need to get a facilitator license from DORA, and then anyone who's going to be handling psilocybin needs a handler's license from Department of Revenue. A lot of people think, like, of course, if you're a facilitator, you need that handler's license, but you really only need it if you're going to actually be handing somebody the psilocybin. And so in Oregon, the facilitators never hand the psilocybin. They're actually not allowed to touch it. And that was included to kind of allow a little bit more for the separation of the services from the provision of the Schedule I substance. In Colorado, we don't have that restriction. Facilitators can be handlers, but they don't necessarily need to be. And so I think that, thinking about how you could set up these different entities, that could be a factor. Doesn't necessarily have to be, but I just thought I'd mention that that's one feature that could allow a little bit more clearer separation. Or for instance, like a healing center could be set up that has a handler licensee associated with it, and that person always hands the psilocybin, which again is sort of the case in Oregon.
That's a great point. Thank you, Tasha, because really it's about how you view how the licenses are structured and which ones you have, and how that, in Oregon, we went for this bifurcated model where you'd have 2 EINs, but to this point, it depends on which licenses you apply for, which would relegate whether or not that entity is allowed to have banking services. I'm gonna hand it over to Matt, our insurance guy at NPA, and let him talk to you a little bit about what we're working on there.
Thanks, Britt. Hello, everyone. Thank you again for being here. I have the fun job of talking with you about insurance today. As we know, or as I suspect most of you know, there is a dearth of options out there when it comes to procuring professional liability insurance and just general insurance, general liability, property insurance, things of that nature. This last November, one of the main providers of that coverage, an outfit named TheraCover, retreated from the marketplace entirely. Important to note here, had nothing to do with the class of business. They wrote on a separate insurance company paper, and they had other considerations, and one of those entities experienced a large loss, causing them to, again, remove themselves from this space. And so with that, that's also something that we've been working on for years here. And I just want to talk with you a little bit about specifically professional liability and general liability. Again, there are limited options out there. There are 2 or 3 markets that we're aware of that are writing coverage. Oftentimes those options, the contracts I've seen are expensive. They have some unfavorable terms, and they include broad exclusions. And so what we've been working on at the NPA is this product, this insurance contract that will provide 2 separate towers of liability within the confines of that same contract. And so you say have a professional liability tower for $1 million worth of coverage. Alongside that, you'd have a general liability tower of coverage that would not, and neither one would erode. Say you have a claim against the professional liability component of that contract, it would not erode the limits over here in the general liability portion. We are, just a little bit of background here, we have partnered with 2 bona fide professional service outfits. We're talking about plant medicine people or entities who have gotten clearance from their boards to work with these Schedule I substances. These are very accomplished people that carry designations like JDs and MBAs. They, again, have board approval to work with us. And through the grace of our members out in Oregon, we've been successful in conducting what's called a pre-feasibility study, which means that, essentially this product can be brought to market. There is real traction out there in the underwriter and actuary space. The only thing we really need, now that we have this pre-feasibility study completed, the only thing we really need to bring this product to market is an investor. We need a little bit of money to bring this product forward, and in that way, we are absolutely currently courting investors. One fun thing that we do have here for you at the end is, if you're open to it, we have an option for you to assist in this product development through what's called a non-binding letter of intent. It just simply says that you're interested in buying this type of insurance should it ever come to market. Again, there's no obligation on your end whatsoever. What that does for us, however, is when we're talking with these investors, we're able to show an interest in this product, and also we're trying to get our arms around the total addressable market, which right now is just Oregon and Colorado's coming online. But if you can imagine this industry in 10 years, we'll have a number of other states, and that pool goes up. And so we're excited about the prospect of it. Absolutely reach out if you'd like to talk a little bit more about it. And again, if you're open to it, we'd very much appreciate it if you would take 10 seconds, just sign this document and indicate your interest in procuring this type of coverage. A few benefits to, and maybe the next slide here, please, Tasha. A few benefits to this product that we're bringing. Right now, again, we talked about what the commercial marketplace has to offer: limited in scope, expensive, constrictive terms. Here, through this vehicle, we have the opportunity to write these policies ourselves. Every single policyholder will have an opportunity to provide insight into where they find deficiencies in their current coverage, and we can write that into these contracts because it's ours, and we can, insure it in whichever way we see fit. And our ambition is, of course, to enable anyone who's practicing in this space to go forward and, do what they do with the comfort of knowing that they will ultimately be protected. Their personal assets will be protected in the event that there is a claim or an adverse outcome that rises to a claim. And so reduced premiums will attach to this product. Again, we just talked about the customized coverage. If and when there are claims, all of that is in-house, and so you don't have to deal with like a third party that the commercial insurance company contracts with. You get to deal with someone in-house who will be incentivized to manage that claim appropriately. Additionally, there will be such things as tailored loss prevention programs. That's risk mitigation for your business. Another thing, that you won't be subject to the whim of the commercial marketplace. That goes up and down. There's cycles of hard and soft markets out there. Through this vehicle, this will be stable and predictable coverage that should exist. The way we have it designed and set up is it will exist in perpetuity. And right now, we're only talking about professional liability and general liability, but there is the opportunity later in time to add additional lines of coverage, such as cyber risk and other lines of coverage. And finally, and this is also important here, when you pay your premiums to a commercial insurance carrier, if you don't have a claim during that year, that premium just gets absorbed by the insurance company and looks a lot like pure profit for them. In this model, we build up those reserves, and over time, some of that money can come back to the policyholder in the form of dividends that get paid out. And so there is a real opportunity to sort of enhance your bottom line, or at least have your premiums that you pay get offset for the year. And so again, if you're open to it, we encourage you to take it. We have a nice little QR code for you. Just sign that letter of intent, and we will continue to work diligently to bring this product to market.
Yeah, and just like double click on that for a second. So, there are products that are out there today. MPA can help. Other friends of the industry like Adam Wilkins and others can also help on those products. But what MPA is developing here is as sort of an industry funded and controlled insurance product that can be more responsive to the industry, that can actually provide dividends to the industry, that can then look at sort of what are the actual risks and how can we mitigate them collectively through insurance. And so it's really, really exciting. There's a lot of work to be done. If you're interested in sort of helping MPA move that project forward and creating this sort of captive insurance product, which would be huge for this space, please sign that non-binding LOI that just says you're interested. It doesn't really say anything else. So,
which is later on in this presentation.
Yeah.
So we will. It's not. It's not
this
right
is definitely
here.
covered, developed, kind of by us and for us, and should exist in perpetuity to support this industry. And just one last note there, just so you know that we're not coming at this totally blind. Early in the MPA's history, we had conversations with the American Psychological Association and how they went about being able to insure their members. And so we absolutely have a model, a template that we can follow. We've improved upon it, or we believe we've improved upon it. And so this is a tried and true way to bring these types of coverages to a specific industry.
Excellent. And so I think that we have probably either scared or bored you a ton with all of the talk about banking and insurance and the things that could go wrong or well. But the truth is that's what happens in a new quote unquote industry or market, right? This has never been done before. And so there's going to be some real push and pull when it comes to how these things move forward. But know that at the NPA, our role here in this ecosystem is really to support the licensees. Whether you're a facilitator, a center, a manufacturer, a cultivator, a testing lab, all of those licensees are folks that we look at as potential members. And as members, we're here to support the work of these licensees to ensure that they can do what they do best, right? Which is heal more people. We've been honing our products and our services in Oregon over the last year and a half since it was set up. And we'll be launching in Colorado this spring and hopefully we'll be able to meet a lot of you in person. Matt and Martha both live there. I'm in Oregon. And then if you all saw yesterday, there's news that new markets are on the way, perhaps even New Mexico. And so our role is to, really lean into any state that has decided to put on these state regulated programs and ensure the licensees of those programs have what they need to conduct the business they're doing. Next slide, please. And this is the logo slide that shows all these folks that we work with and all the things we do. But really, membership is kind of three key areas. In Oregon, we noticed that lead generation, meaning advertising, marketing, getting the word out there, is still very necessary. No matter how much we all want people to know about this, lots of folks aren't researching it. And so there needs to be, and one of the things that we're working on in Oregon, and we'll do the same in Colorado, is creating those type of awareness campaigns to drive people to your websites, to drive people to your information online. We're also looking at hiring education liaisons. This is something pharma does quite well. It's educating physicians, therapists, others on the benefits of psilocybin, and doing that in a non-promotional way, in a real educated way. We'll be looking to bring those to the Colorado market. Another big piece that we're offering all of our members as part of their membership package is Homecoming Health. This is a practice management and client data management solution that is tailored specifically for the state markets. We've been working with Homecoming for the last year and a half, almost 2 years, to really key in this product to make sure it is providing for everybody who's operating here. The NPA has roughly 14 service centers and over 80 facilitators as members, and they're all currently working through the Homecoming system. The reason for that is we talked earlier about all the different types of business setups. That becomes very complicated to maneuver and schedule and to coordinate pieces while also ensuring best quality of care. The Homecoming Health platform allows for you to do that and allows for interoperability amongst service centers, facilitators, and the like. So happy to give folks demos on that. And then finally, as a member, we have community hubs, online meetings, and really just trying to help disseminate information amongst our members, such that way everybody is kind of getting the real on the daily. When we look at all of our partners, we're working with everybody from very large marketing and advertising firms. You'll see larger banks on here. All of these folks are partnering with us to bring you this list of member benefits. And like I said, for any of these, please reach out either to banking@yournpa.org or info@yournpa.org, and we can provide you with more information on how to access some of these services and goods. And there it is. This is the letter that Matt was asking everybody to take a look at. If you wouldn't mind taking a snap of that QR code. It's a very simple, easy to fill out, non-binding commitment. And this, again, will allow us to prove to not only the funders or the investors, but also to wider regulatory bodies of the necessity of having this type of coverage and what we're looking to bring to the market. Grimes, anything else to say there, Matt?
No, I think we've covered it. I know insurance is boring, and it is a necessary component of conducting business. It is quite literally the foundation upon which business is predicated, and so we're working diligently to solve for it, everybody.
Awesome. Well, thank you guys so much for sharing that. And, just for a little context, I know we've been, HAF, Healing Advocacy Fund, has been doing a lot of these webinars. And I think a lot of the work that we do, which tends to be on the advocacy and education side. How do we get the program rules right? How do we provide sort of the right supports to the different prospective licensees to be able to participate and just have the basic information? But there's a lot of stuff that we don't do. And we really appreciate the work that the NPA is doing. I think that they're really filling a lot of needed gaps to help lift up this entire program and get people, kind of coordinating on access to different resources, business services that could really benefit you. So we did want to kind of share that they're out there. that they've been doing this work in Oregon, that they are bringing it to Colorado. And of course, I know many of you are probably already familiar with Martha Hamill and the amazing work she's been doing in the psychedelic space in Colorado for many years now. And so awesome to be able to partner with her in this capacity as well. So with that, this last slide is just kind of a few links to additional resources. Of course, check out the DOR rules, check out the DOR fees for businesses. HAF just got a rules rundown that was published in Psychedelic Alpha that sort of breaks things down, if that's still helpful to you at this point. And then on the vendor side, we are not, again, recommending specific vendors. We have been trying to do some digging to figure out who's out there because, this NPA product sounds amazing and it's not quite there yet. So we know that you all are trying to make decisions today about how you can think about liability coverage. We do know that Oath has offered, Oath is a broker that has offered a product in Oregon, a policy in Oregon, is planning to come to Colorado. We don't have the details yet on the specifics though, but that can be one to keep an eye on. Another broker, Adam Wilkins, has been working really hard on this. So we threw his contact in there if you want to reach out and chat to him and get some more information. And then of course, chat with Britt and Matt and Martha from the NPA. Last piece of advice, if you do get a CPA and a lawyer, get them together, get them talking to each other because they might have different ideas about how this all fits together. And then finally, if there are really great, vendors out there that you're working with that you think it would be good to, again, like not refer people to, but add to sort of lists so that people know who's out there, please do let us know. Always love to receive that information. And with that, we are going to switch on over to the Q&A portion of all this. So yeah, Josh, were you gonna jump in? Oh, sorry, I didn't mean to put you on the spot. It seemed like somebody unmuted there.
No, I did unmute. And yeah, no, please, if you have questions, send them in, via the Q&A function. I've answered a fair amount already. There is, kicking the Q&A off. I will ask one question to Matt and Britt and Martha. Someone asked, can people collect funds for facilitation using credit cards? What's the story with merchant services and credit card processing? What have you guys been up to on that regard?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. And the answer there is yes and no. The truth is it depends on what license you're carrying. And in Oregon, facilitators, based on the division of labor and who is touching psilocybin versus who is not, the facilitators are able to take credit cards through our merchant service provider. So we've been negotiating with merchant service provider. We have two different ones, Argyle and Goat. They have different reasons why you'd want to use one or the other, fees, et cetera. However, we're looking to establish, as large of a corral of folks for you all to choose from. But right now we have two different merchant service providers. The reason it's important, if you're a psilocybin touching license holder, and that is part of your remit, I would not suggest you use Stripe or any of the online platforms that you'll be illegally using the rails of MasterCard or Visa, and that can have actually some long-term downstream personal effects, like being blackballed from those credit lines in perpetuity as an individual, not just as a business, for having used those illegally for the submission of funds for Schedule I substances. So I would highly advise you not to use something like a Square whenever you're providing medicine services through that portion. However, the facilitation, right, the hours that you would sit with a client as you're sitting there, all of that, if properly quarantined from, say, the part of the business that's touching psilocybin, that all can be ran through our merchant service provider. So you will be able to, I would say, in Oregon, probably about the $200 to $300 that the psilocybin costs. That's the only bit that is not currently being put on credit cards at some of the service centers. So all other services except for the psilocybin purchase are being put on credit cards through the merchant services we've provided.
Thanks, Brett.
Yeah, and I'd just like to add that any other questions or ways that we can support in Colorado, we'd love to hear. That's what we're here for, is to really just support all of you who are entering into this space. And we offer all of these wonderful services, but maybe there's something we haven't thought of yet. So please feel free to reach out to any of us. My email is martha@yournpa.org. I'd love to talk to anybody about what you're seeing and what you hope to see in the industry. We are co-creating this together as a community, as facilitators. Everybody who is a part of the industry is building this. And so that's what the NPA is for, is to allow for you all to take ownership over the development of what we're doing here.
We have a question here. Is there a list of CPAs, law firms, or lawyers already compiled, ready to take on clients for this work? So, at Healing Advocacy Fund, we're not in a position to do the kind of vetting that we can make recommendations. We are working on a list for informational purposes of like, here's who we know who's out there, without sort of presenting that as like, we have vetted and can vouch for these people. But that is in process because we're still doing the outreach. It's still early days, and so we don't want to give a list and then leave out a number of options. Obviously, no list is going to be exhaustive anyways, but we have a little bit more work to do to compile that. Of course, on the lawyer side, since we have Josh on this call, I'm going to say, Vicente LLP is fantastic, Josh is fantastic, and they really provide excellent legal analysis to HAF when it comes to kind of the policy analysis work that we do. And then of course, there's a number of other great lawyers out there as well. On the CPA side, I'm still sort of in the early stages of figuring out who all is out there. Anybody else want to chime in on that?
Yeah, Tasha, thanks for the kind words. There's also the Psychedelic Bar Association that has like a list of attorneys that are like dedicated to like the psychedelic community, that you can also go check out. And there's, I think if you don't, on the CPA front or the tax attorney front, if there's not something that like comes to mind, if there's not something that's part of NPA's membership or that you don't see at any of these like community building events, like you can look and see, like, especially on this 280E issue of like, hey, what are some like well-known cannabis tax attorneys in the space? And they'll like have an opinion on exactly how 280E should be applied. And I'd be surprised if any of the opinions are the same, but they'll all have an opinion.
Tasha, if you don't mind, I thought there was a question in here regarding the insurance and the coverage of substances. As far as current policies being available to the market, from what I understand, most of them are addressing it strictly as psilocybin or psilocybin mushrooms, and they are not addressing this as a broader contextual of psychedelic assisted care. That is mainly through their own compliance reasons of, they oftentimes started in cannabis, and so that got its own designation, and so they felt like this would be psilocybin mushrooms. Where we're headed and looking to set up, though, is more that's agnostic to the substance, and it's really about the provision of the care. And so that's the real difference that we see it today. Now, later on down the lines, the ones that we had mentioned, Oath, Adam, others, they may be expanding beyond psilocybin mushrooms, but what we've seen to date has been largely written towards the provision of that substance without any openings or mention of other regulated substances. And that can also be due to the fact that Oregon came first and they did not open up to anything outside of psilocybin mushrooms. And therefore the market has not caught up to where Colorado's headed in the next few years.
I think that's right, Britt. And I also, would note that if we're going to add another substance in Colorado, it's going to take some time. It's not like, oh, tomorrow, like Ibogaine just fits in the same rules as psilocybin. It's like very different medicines with very different health and safety concerns and all sorts of different concerns. And so it'll take some time, and hopefully with that time, our friends at NPA will be able to figure out an insurance solution for us.
Thanks, Josh.
Yeah, thanks, Josh. That's definitely the plan.
There's a question here that I wanted to take a crack at and then have Josh correct me if I'm wrong again. So the question is, how can a healing center provide a client with psilocybin if they aren't quote unquote handling it? And I think generally speaking, it's more that let me know if I'm wrong on this, that the facilitator could avoid handling it. So you could have a model where sort of like the healing center has a handler and that handler hands off the product and the facilitator is sort of insulated from interacting at all with the psilocybin. Don't know if it works in the other direction. So I guess that's sort of my question for you, Josh.
Yeah, I mean, it's, this is like still an area that's being figured out, and it's gonna like, really come down to like how it's like works in practice. There's an ability to co-locate two healing center licenses. So you could have one healing center that handles the psilocybin and another healing center that provides, that sort of like ongoing like integration or administration or prep sessions. And so there's that ability. There's also the ability of like two entities like potentially under one license. And so you have one entity that touches the psilocybin. This is sort of what Britt was referring to. You have one entity that handles the psilocybin and a different entity that handles prep, admin, and integration. And so then, this entity that's not touching the psilocybin can make the claim like, well, we're not the ones handling this illegal substance. And that's why we should have banking services or maybe insurance or XYZ. And so that's sort of the theories of how this is like going to work out, and people are actively like applying in these different or applying for licensures under these different models. And I don't know, Britt, if you had anything you want to add to that.
Yeah, no, but I will say that we will, and we'll make sure that everybody on this call gets notification of it, but looking to have a lot of the Oregon service centers and facilitators doing a Q&A with those who might be interested for talking to people who are on the ground and living this day in and day out. I think there's a lot of questions that we can try to field, but we all sit outside of actual licensees. Like, I'm not a licensed facilitator, and neither is Matt. And Josh, I'm not sure if you are, but if in a sense where we're at is we're really looking to provide access also to people who are doing the work that you're looking to do. And so making sure there's that kind of connectivity. So hopefully we can get you guys connected in the near future. And, for things that we can't answer, you can definitely talk to folks who are on the ground and in the field.
Yeah, love that idea, Britt. And I think that there is a lot of value and opportunities for Colorado folks to speak with Oregon folks who have just been tackling these issues head on for 2 years now. And I always love to give a shout out to our Oregon friends, because he's really taken on a lot.
Yeah.
Excellent.
I'll take an easy question that's in here. Yes, you can have prep and integration in different locations than administration. You can have prep and integration virtually, under the rules. And so the answer to that question is yes. And you can also have them at your healing center and in person.
So to double click on that, the only thing that needs to happen at a healing center is the psilocybin administration session. Preparation and integration can happen there, or they can happen virtually. Yeah, good to know.
Josh, can you speak to the ketamine? Is there a problem in Colorado having a ketamine clinic that would then offer psilocybin?
I mean, I don't know if like problem is like the word I would necessarily use, but it is, there is the ability to overlap like a ketamine clinic with a psilocybin, with a healing center, under state law. Like, there's no prohibition against it. Now, there's a number of other issues that might come up around storing ketamine and what, and what, are you going to store ketamine in the same place you're storing psilocybin? What's the DEA going to do when they come, when they want to do an inspection? So there's a lot of potential issues. And, a lot of it too, like with ketamine, depends on like, is it IM versus lozenges versus like a participant bringing their own? Do you have a prescriber do you have a prescriber there? Do you not? And then you have this like other question of, so there's complications, but there's no like clear prohibitions. And I think it can be navigated. But you do have this question too, like around insurance, and like if you have an insurance policy that's covering your ketamine clinic, is that same policy going to cover psilocybin? Are they going to drop you? If you do one or the other, do you need separate entities? If you have separate entities, can you have like a shared use agreement over like the bathroom or a reception area or a treatment room? And so there's a lot of complications that haven't been figured out yet. And I welcome working with anyone who wants to figure those out. But there's a fair amount of them.
Yeah.
And I'll just add, like the program was the rules were created and ketamine was considered, and there was like a desire to allow that to happen. So I think there's a question of like, what are the program rules? And then what are all these other potentially outside of the program rules complicating pieces, which are sort of two different questions. But we do know a lot of people are interested in that question. And so I think, you know, hopefully as this develops, we'll start to get some clearer answers on some of those pieces, or clearer strategies for people to consider.
Yeah, and to Tasha's point, like this Colorado Healing Center rules were designed to allow healing centers to be at other like healthcare facilities or ketamine clinics. So it's not an issue of like the healing center rules. Like what we're talking about is, you know, issues around storing a controlled substance under federal law, insurance, banking, sharing premises, like, you know, these like sort of practical issues that like are that should be solvable in some manner. At some point.
One thing you mentioned there, and I kind of want to go there really quickly in our last few minutes, Josh, is if you already have a business and you are setting up psilocybin to be a second business and you start reaching out to your providers, let it be known that they may look to drop you because they will see you. I mean, there is the risk when you ask, will you cover me? They say, no, am I not going to cover you, I'm going to drop you because you have just told me that you're going to be doing something illegal in your same practice. So I just want to make it clear that maybe you want to ask for a friend, right? Rather than saying, I'm planning on doing this. Like, just be very careful about who you're approaching, because it's not up to the state when it comes to these businesses and these third-party providers. It is their own internal compliance that dictates what they will or will not do, or why not they will drop you. And so you have to just realize that even though the state has made provisions for a lot of this, and it's great, and it moved it forward in a lot of ways, a lot of this risk that is imposed now on third parties, they get to decide whether or not they accept it, right? And to what end that they're going to provide service. So I would just also keep in mind that, you know, like there have been instances of people just calling to inquire, and then they find that they are now without service. So just be cautious there.
Britt, that is a very good point. Like it could be almost assumed that like your traditional professional malpractice insurance is not going to cover you. You know, like to be a facilitator in this program, and that you'll most certainly at this juncture in time, you know, March 2025, need a separate policy. So just go get the separate policy.
Yeah. That's a great point. Yeah. Just don't risk it. Just go ahead and assume that you're going to need it.
All right.
Any other questions on here that we missed?
There are a few more, I believe. We're kind of getting down to the wire here in terms of timing. We just have a couple of minutes left. And so I do think, you know, we'll download a report of these questions and see if we can kind of follow up with resources that address some of these if there are any outstanding. I also do want to, I should have put this in the slide deck, but just want to mention that we are hosting a couple events late March, early April that are designed to bring facilitators and healing centers together, support that kind of networking option. So on March 31st, HAF is going to be hosting a virtual lunch meet and greet. And then on April 2nd, we're partnering with the National Psychedelics Association as well as McAllister Law Office to host an in-person event in Denver on April 2nd. So do keep an eye out for that in your inbox, and we would love to see you all there. And yeah, with that, I think we can go ahead and wrap it up. Thank you so much to everyone who stayed on until the end. And of course, we just look forward to continuing to be in touch with you as we move into this exciting next phase in this program and some of these businesses start to really become operational. Yeah, have a great rest of your day, everyone. And thank you, Matt, Britt, Martha, and Josh.
Thanks, Tasha.
Thank you, everybody.
Thanks, everyone. Bye.